For over 3 millennia, a civilization rose from the banks of the Nile to shape the ancient world. With colossal monuments, divine pharaohs, and a culture of mystery and mastery, ancient Egypt stood as a beacon of human achievement. But like all great empires, it too would crumble, not all at once, but slowly, across centuries. This is the story of the rise and fall of ancient Egypt, a journey through time, power, belief, and legacy. Long before the world knew the names of Ramses or Cleopatra, before the pyramids stood tall in the desert sun, a quiet miracle unfolded along a mighty river, the Nile. From humble beginnings, small farming villages, fishermen and herders, would arise a civilization destined to defy time itself. This is the story of Egypt's beginning, a tale of myth, earth, water, and fire. This is the dawn of ancient Egypt. Around 5000 BCE, the Nile Valley was dotted with simple communities. These early Egyptians lived in mud brick homes and relied on the Nile's annual flood for survival. The inundation, regular and life-giving, deposited rich silt on the banks, turning the desert green. The river was more than a source of water. It was the axis of the universe. Life, death, planting, and harvesting all revolved around it. It inspired early myths, linking the land's fertility with divine cycles. These first settlements were isolated but began trading goods, pottery, flint tools, and grain. Over generations, tribal leaders began asserting control, forming the first proto-states. As centuries passed, two dominant regions began to emerge: Upper Egypt in the south, with its narrow valley and cliffs, and Lower Egypt in the north, with its wide delta and marshes. Each region developed unique cultures, visible in their pottery styles, burial practices, and symbols. Upper Egypt was ruled by powerful local chieftains. Tombs became more elaborate and elite classes began to emerge. Meanwhile, in Lower Egypt, trade with the Levant introduced new materials and ideas. Conflicts between these proto-kingdoms intensified. One symbol began to dominate: the white crown of Upper Egypt, signifying growing military and political strength. By around 3200 BCE, two major kingdoms had formed, one in the delta, Lower Egypt, the other near Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt. They were led by powerful kings, names mostly lost to history, save for one: Scorpion. The Scorpion King, an early warlord from Upper Egypt, left behind one of the oldest known royal artifacts, a ceremonial mace head depicting him wearing the white crown. His conquests would lay the groundwork for total unification. Soon after, another leader emerged, Narmer. On the famous Narmer palette, he is shown wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. His victory marked a pivotal moment, the dawn of Dynastic Egypt. Narmer, also known as Menes, is credited as the first pharaoh, the divine ruler who united the two lands. He founded Memphis, a capital at the strategic junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. With unification came central administration. Scribes recorded inventories, and taxes were levied on grain. Religious and political ideology fused. The king was not just ruler, but a god incarnate. Horus on earth. The tombs of the early pharaohs at Abydos reveal wealth and ritual. These were not just burials, they were statements of divine authority, protected by elaborate grave goods, retainers, and sacrifice. The concept of kingship evolved quickly. The pharaoh was seen as a cosmic force, a bridge between the gods and the people. His role was to maintain Ma'at, the divine order of balance and justice. This concept is foundational to Egyptian civilization. Without Ma'at, chaos, Isfet, would reign. Every harvest, flood, and victory was attributed to the pharaoh's ability to uphold this sacred order. Mythology blossomed. Stories of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set shaped religious practices. The pharaoh, like Horus, had to triumph over chaos. And in death, he became Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. By the end of the early dynastic period, Egypt had developed writing, centralized authority, religious structure, and architectural ambition. The seeds of the pyramids, temples, and grand civilization to come were now firmly planted. These early kings may be lesser known than those of later periods, but their legacy is profound. They transformed Egypt from a land of villages into a mighty, organized, and sacred kingdom. The Nile had given birth to a civilization, and Egypt was now ready to rise. Egypt stood united. The pharaoh ruled not just with power, but with sacred authority. From the first to the third dynasties, the early groundwork had been laid. Now, with the dawn of the Old Kingdom, Egypt was ready to carve its legacy into stone, a legacy that would endure for millennia. This was an age of ambition, of engineering, of the gods walking among men. This was the age of the pyramid builders. The Old Kingdom officially begins with the Third Dynasty and the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. His name would be immortalized not only for consolidating the state, but for commissioning one of humanity's greatest architectural innovations, the Step Pyramid. At Saqqara, Djoser tasked his brilliant architect, Imhotep, with building a tomb unlike any before. What began as a mastaba, a flat, rectangular tomb, evolved into a six-tiered limestone structure. It was the first monumental stone building in history. Imhotep, later deified as a god of wisdom and healing, laid the blueprint for all future pyramid builders. The Step Pyramid symbolized the pharaoh's journey to the heavens, a stairway to eternity. The Fourth Dynasty heralded the apex of pyramid construction. Pharaoh Sneferu, Djoser's successor several generations later, was a restless visionary. He experimented with design, building at least 3 pyramids, including the famous Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. His efforts culminated in the Red Pyramid, the world's first smooth-sided pyramid, perfect in geometry and vast in scale. But it was his son Khufu who would forever reshape the Egyptian skyline. The Great Pyramid at Giza, Khufu's tomb, was a marvel. Rising nearly 150 meters and constructed from over 2 million limestone blocks, it stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. Khafre, Khufu's son, added his own pyramid beside it and constructed the Great Sphinx, guardian of the necropolis, its lion's body and human head possibly bearing the likeness of the king himself. Menkaure, Khafre's successor, built a smaller pyramid, but more refined. Together, the trio left behind an eternal monument to divine kingship, astronomical precision, and human will. The Old Kingdom was not just an age of pharaohs, it was a highly organized society. The state controlled agriculture, mining, trade, and massive construction projects. Scribes formed a powerful bureaucratic class, documenting taxes, rituals, and daily life on papyrus scrolls. Egypt's wealth came from the Nile, but also from trade with Nubia, Byblos, and Sinai. Expeditions returned with gold, incense, cedarwood, turquoise, and exotic animals. Religion became more codified. The cult of Ra, the sun god, rose in prominence, particularly under the Fifth Dynasty. Pharaohs now took the title Son of Ra, reinforcing their divine lineage. Temples were constructed, not just as homes for gods, but as economic centers. Priests gained influence, managing wealth and interpreting the will of the divine. For all the glory of the pyramids, it was the common people who made them possible. Farmers worked during the flood season on royal projects, not slaves, as often mythologized, but corvée laborers paid in food, beer, and clothing. Artisans carved statues and reliefs. Bakers, brewers, and herders supported vast crews. Life was structured and spiritual. Egyptians believed in the afterlife deeply. Even commoners were buried with amulets and simple goods to prepare for eternity. Family life was central. Women held more rights than in most ancient societies, owning property, managing households, and sometimes wielding political power. The Egyptian worldview was one of cycles, of flood and harvest, life and death, day and night. These rhythms were echoed in their art, architecture, and faith. Despite centuries of stability, cracks began to appear. The Sixth Dynasty, particularly under Pepi II, marked the beginning of decline. Pepi ruled for over 90 years, possibly the longest reign in history. But longevity came with stagnation. The central authority weakened. Local governors or nomarchs began to assert independence. The bureaucracy bloated. Resources stretched thin. The grandeur of pyramid building faded. Tombs became smaller, less precise. The economy struggled. And then came famine. As drought gripped the Nile and floods failed, famine and unrest followed. Without strong leadership, Egypt fractured. The once mighty Old Kingdom, builder of stone wonders, crumbled into regionalism and internal conflict. The divine pharaoh, once seen as the unshakable link between heaven and earth, now appeared vulnerable. The gods, it seemed, had turned away. Thus ended the Old Kingdom, not with fire and invasion, but with slow decay. Yet its legacy would echo forever through its monuments, beliefs, and the eternal pyramids that still rise against the desert sun. Empires seldom fall in a single day. They fracture from within, like a cracked statue left too long in the sun. After the glory of the Old Kingdom, Egypt, the land of divine pharaohs and eternal pyramids, descended into chaos. The lights of a once centralized kingdom dimmed. Rival kings claimed power. Famine swept the land. And for the first time in centuries, Egypt stood divided. This was the first intermediate period, a time of collapse, but also of change. The seeds of collapse were sown during the reign of Pepi II. His rule, possibly lasting over 90 years, outlived generations of advisors, heirs, and noblemen. With his long reign came inertia. The pharaoh grew old, and with him, the machinery of government slowed. Provincial governors, known as nomarchs, began asserting more control. Once beholden to the pharaoh, they now acted with increasing autonomy. They built tombs as grand as the king's, raised their own militias, and governed regions like personal kingdoms. Meanwhile, Egypt's vast construction projects strained resources. Tombs shrank. Pyramid quality diminished. And then, nature struck a fatal blow. The Nile's annual flood, the lifeblood of Egypt, began to fail. When the Nile failed to flood, crops withered, food stores dwindled. A once orderly society began to unravel. Starvation swept through towns and villages. Families abandoned their homes. Mass graves filled the desert. Contemporary texts, like the Admonitions of Ipuwer, describe a country in total chaos. Servants rebelling, tombs robbed, cities burning. The poet laments, "The river is blood," and the poor man says, "I wish I were dead." Central authority collapsed. The gods were silent. Ma'at, the balance between order and chaos, had shattered. Egypt broke in two. In the north, a dynasty of kings ruled from Heracleopolis. In the south, Theban leaders rose to power. Both claimed legitimacy. Both adopted royal titles. But neither had the strength to unify the two lands. The Heracleopolitan kings, the 9th and 10th dynasties, struggled to maintain control over the Delta and Middle Egypt. Their rule was pragmatic, but uninspiring. They lacked resources, popular support, and military dominance. Meanwhile, in Thebes, a family of warriors and priests began asserting themselves. The 11th dynasty emerged from this southern power base, a dynasty that would ultimately reunite Egypt. Despite the turbulence, the first intermediate period was not devoid of progress. In fact, it was a time of profound cultural evolution. Freed from the strict artistic canon of the Old Kingdom, local artisans explored new forms of expression. Tombs in provincial centers like Asyut and Beni Hassan display vibrant, individualized art. Scenes of everyday life, fishing, farming, feasting, became common. Personal tomb biographies began to appear, highlighting the lives of nobles and officials. Literature flourished. The dispute between a man and his Ba reveals deep philosophical inquiry about death, morality, and existence, proof that even in chaos, the Egyptian spirit searched for meaning. In Thebes, a determined ruler named Mentuhotep II set out to do what no king had done in over a century: reunite Egypt. He launched a military campaign northward, confronting the Heracleopolitan rulers. The conflict was long and bloody. It's likely that both armies consisted of Egyptian soldiers, brother against brother. Yet, through superior organization, charisma, and divine legitimacy, Mentuhotep prevailed. Around 2055 BCE, he declared himself the ruler of a united Egypt. The Theban dynasty had triumphed, and the first intermediate period came to an end. With reunification came a renewed focus on order. On restoring Ma'at, temples were rebuilt, tombs became grand again. New artistic styles blended regional traditions. Egypt, scarred but resilient, prepared to enter a new golden age. The first intermediate period is often remembered for its darkness, but it was also a time of adaptation. The people of Egypt learned that even divine kings could falter. They discovered new voices, new stories, and new expressions of faith. From collapse came change, from division came unity, and from the ashes of chaos rose the Middle Kingdom, a rebirth that would once again see Egypt reach for the stars. After years of civil war, famine, and spiritual uncertainty, Egypt was whole again. From the heart of Thebes, a new line of pharaohs restored unity, confidence, and glory to the two lands. The Middle Kingdom was more than a political triumph. It was a renaissance of culture, justice, and resilience. This was an age when Egypt looked inward and matured, guided not just by divine right, but by wisdom and statecraft. Mentuhotep II's reunification of Egypt around 2055 BCE marked the true beginning of the Middle Kingdom. He reigned for over 50 years, consolidating control and rebuilding the nation. He chose Thebes as his capital and emphasized divine kingship, but with a renewed emphasis on stability, law, and service. His mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into cliffs overlooking the Nile, was unlike anything before it, blending architecture and nature in harmony. His successors continued the process of stabilization. The 11th dynasty laid the groundwork for an even greater age to come, the 12th dynasty. The 12th dynasty, beginning with Pharaoh Amenemhat I, is often considered Egypt's classical period. Amenemhat moved the capital to Ichtawi, near the Fayum oasis, a more central location for administration and trade. His reign was marked by careful statecraft. He reorganized the bureaucracy, strengthened provincial oversight, and even co-regented with his son, Senusret I, to ensure a smooth transition of power. Senusret I and his successors expanded Egypt's borders south into Nubia, building fortresses like Buhen to guard trade routes and resources. They also fostered internal development, canals, temples, irrigation systems, and education. Senusret III, one of Egypt's most celebrated warrior kings, was revered not only for military conquests, but for his legal reforms. He restricted the power of the nomarchs, strengthening central authority. The Middle Kingdom wasn't just politically stable, it was intellectually rich. Literature flourished as never before. Texts like the Tale of Sinuhe, the Instructions of Amenemhat, and the Eloquent Peasant captured Egyptian philosophy, ethics, and emotion. These were not just religious works. They explored identity, justice, betrayal, ambition, and the afterlife. For the first time, individual human experience took center stage. Art also shifted. Statues became more expressive, less idealized. The pharaoh was depicted with contemplative features, not as a god, but as a thoughtful leader shouldering the weight of kingship. In tombs, the afterlife remained vital, but it became more accessible. Spells from the coffin texts replaced earlier pyramid texts, offering a democratic path to eternity for nobles and officials. The Middle Kingdom saw remarkable engineering initiatives. Most notable was the Fayum project, a large-scale agricultural development plan initiated by Amenemhat III. Lake Moeris, a natural basin, was expanded and regulated by canals. The land around it was drained and irrigated, turning desert into fertile farmland. This ambitious hydraulic project supported Egypt's growing population and economy. It showcased not only engineering skill, but a new philosophy: kingship as stewardship, not just divine command. Monumental architecture continued as well. Pyramids were built, though smaller than those of the Old Kingdom. Temples flourished, especially in Karnak and Abydos. The Middle Kingdom reinforced national identity through religion. While older deities like Ra remained central, new gods rose in prominence, particularly Amun, the Hidden One. Amun's cult, centered in Thebes, blended with Ra to form Amun-Ra, the supreme deity by the end of the period. The priesthood of Amun would later become one of the most powerful institutions in Egyptian history. Meanwhile, funerary practices evolved. Wooden models of daily life, bakers, butchers, scribes, were placed in tombs. These were believed to magically continue their tasks for the deceased in the afterlife. The growing personalization of the afterlife mirrored the Middle Kingdom's view of a more involved, relatable existence, spiritual, yet grounded. Despite its cultural and political brilliance, the Middle Kingdom eventually began to fragment. The 13th dynasty saw a rapid turnover of kings, more than 50 rulers in less than 150 years. While the central government nominally held power, regional governors began to reassert their independence. Foreigners, including a mysterious people known as the Hyksos, began settling in the Delta region. Administrative complexity and dynastic infighting weakened the state. Egypt once again moved toward decentralization, slowly at first, then suddenly. The Middle Kingdom had lit a flame of renaissance, but soon, dark clouds would gather over the two lands. A new period of foreign domination was approaching. Yet for 2 centuries, the Middle Kingdom stood as a pinnacle of Egyptian civilization, a testament to what stability, wisdom, and cultural introspection could achieve. In the ruins of the past, Egypt had rebuilt herself into a wiser and more enduring state. Egypt had once again known greatness. The Middle Kingdom restored order, culture, and confidence. But nothing in Egypt's history remained static for long. Slowly, then all at once, the fabric of unity began to fray. The pharaoh's power weakened. Foreigners arrived, some peacefully, others with ambition. This was not simply a period of decline. It was a time of profound change, a time when Egypt lost her crown, but began to forge a sharper sword. The Middle Kingdom's greatness faded not through conquest, but through slow erosion. As the 12th dynasty ended, the 13th dynasty emerged. But its rule was fractured and short-lived. Over 50 kings reigned in rapid succession, many ruling only months. Administrative instability meant provinces acted independently. Local officials raised their own armies, collected their own taxes, and in time, answered to no one. In this environment of confusion and decentralization, new groups began arriving from the northeast. Among them were the Hyksos, a people whose origins are debated, but who would soon become rulers of Lower Egypt. The Hyksos, a term derived from the Egyptian Heka Kasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands, were likely a mix of Semitic peoples from the Levant. They came not as invaders, but as migrants, traders, and laborers. Over time, they settled in the Nile Delta. These newcomers brought with them revolutionary technologies: horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and advanced metallurgy. At first, they coexisted with native Egyptians. They worshipped Egyptian gods, adopted local customs, and married into Egyptian families. But as Egypt's central government deteriorated, the Hyksos filled the power vacuum. Around 1650 BCE, the Hyksos established control over Lower Egypt and declared themselves kings, forming the 15th dynasty. They made Avaris in the eastern delta their capital. The Hyksos kings styled themselves in Egyptian royal tradition. They wore the double crown, commissioned temples, and praised Egyptian deities, but also introduced foreign gods like Baal and Anat. King Apophis, or Apepi, one of the most powerful Hyksos rulers, reigned during this period. Though often remembered as a tyrant in Egyptian texts, archaeological evidence shows a sophisticated and multicultural capital with Syrian, Canaanite, and Egyptian influences. The Hyksos maintained control not by brute force but through diplomacy, trade, and superior technology, especially their chariots, which native Egyptians had never encountered before. While the Hyksos controlled the north, native Egyptian kings continued to rule from Thebes in the south. These rulers formed the 16th and 17th dynasties. Though technically vassals, they were far from powerless. Over time, resentment grew. The Theban princes saw the Hyksos not just as foreigners, but as illegitimate occupiers. Hostility intensified. One of the most vivid stories from this era involves a letter from Apophis to a Theban king, Seqen-Enradao, complaining that the noisy hippos in Thebes were disturbing his sleep in faraway Avaris. Likely a political provocation, not a serious concern. Seqen-Enradao took up arms but was killed in battle. His mummy reveals brutal head wounds, possibly from Hyksos axes or clubs. His sacrifice, however, ignited a national cause. Seqen-Enra's son, Kamose, took the fight further. A bold and strategic leader, Kamose led military campaigns northward, reclaiming territory and harassing Hyksos outposts. His stela, carved in Thebes, thunder with defiance. "I shall destroy Apophis and lay waste his cities." Kamose's efforts laid the foundation for a full-scale liberation, but he died young, possibly in combat. It would fall to his brother, Ahmose I, to finish what his family began. The second intermediate period was a time of division and foreign rule, but also of adaptation and learning. Egypt absorbed new technologies, new animals, and new ideas. The humiliation of foreign domination became a powerful national memory. It forged a new kind of Egyptian kingship, more militant, more strategic, and more determined to never allow another occupation. The Thebans learned from their enemies. They adopted chariots and improved their armies. They united the people not just around kingship, but around resistance. The stage was set for Egypt's most aggressive and expansive age, the New Kingdom, an era forged by fire, where pharaohs became conquerors, and Egypt became an empire. The foreign yoke had been cast off. The Nile once again flowed under native rule, and Egypt, wounded but wiser, was reborn. The New Kingdom was not just a restoration, it was an explosion of ambition. A bold proclamation to the world: Egypt shall not only survive, it shall conquer. This was the age of imperial pharaohs, massive temples, and a civilization at the height of its might. Around 1550 BCE, Ahmose III drove the Hyksos from Avaris and pursued them into southern Canaan. With the delta reclaimed and Thebes restored, he united Egypt and declared the beginning of the New Kingdom, the 18th dynasty. Ahmose rebuilt cities, temples, and administrative systems. He expelled foreign garrisons and reasserted control over Nubia. Egypt's southern territories, rich in gold and manpower, became key to the empire's rise. This was not just military victory, it was a cultural renaissance. Egypt's pride was restored, and the kings of the new kingdom would now bear a new identity: warrior pharaohs. Thutmose II extended Egyptian control far into the Levant and deep into Nubia. His campaigns set the tone for imperialism. His successor, Thutmose II, continued this path, but it was Thutmose III who earned the title Napoleon of Ancient Egypt. Thutmose II led at least 17 military campaigns into Asia. He crossed the Euphrates and fought at Megiddo, one of the earliest battles recorded in detail. His armies brought back tribute, captives, and exotic goods. The Egyptian empire now stretched from the fourth cataract of the Nile to the banks of the Orontes River in Syria. Egypt was not just a kingdom, it was a superpower. After the death of Thutmose II, his wife and half-sister, Hatshepsut, took the throne, first as regent, then as pharaoh in her own right. She ruled for over 20 years. Hatshepsut wore the false beard and took male royal titles, but she brought a distinctly different approach: peace, prosperity, and bold building projects. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari remains a masterpiece. She reopened trade routes, including a famous expedition to the land of Punt, possibly modern-day Somalia, which returned with incense, ebony, gold, and exotic animals. Though her successors tried to erase her legacy, modern archaeology has restored her place as one of Egypt's greatest rulers. Amenhotep III ruled during Egypt's Golden Age. His reign was marked by luxury, diplomacy, and monumental building. He called himself the dazzling sun disk and lived up to the title. He built or expanded countless temples, including Luxor and Karnak, and commissioned over 250 statues of himself. The Colossi of Memnon, towering guardians of his mortuary temple, still stand today. Diplomatically, Amenhotep maintained peace through marriage and diplomacy. The Amarna letters, clay tablets found decades later, reveal a web of correspondence with kings from Babylon, Mitanni, and the Hittites. Egypt at this time was fabulously wealthy, culturally vibrant, and politically stable. But beneath the gold and incense, a revolution was brewing, one that would shake the foundations of Egyptian belief. Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, changed his name to Akhenaten and launched a religious revolution. He declared Aten, the sun disk, the sole god, dismantling Egypt's polytheism and priesthoods. He built a new capital, Akhetaten, or modern-day Amarna. Art changed dramatically. Royal figures were shown with elongated heads, pot-bellies, and intimate family scenes. But Akhenaten's reforms alienated many. Temples fell into disrepair. The powerful priesthood of Amen was suppressed. The empire weakened as foreign territories sensed instability. After his death, Egypt rapidly reversed course. His successor, a boy king, would become the most famous pharaoh in history. Tutankhamun, only 9 when he became pharaoh, restored the traditional gods and moved the capital back to Thebes. His reign was short, but his tomb, discovered in 1922, sparked global fascination. After his death, and then Horemheb ruled. Horemheb, a former general, erased the Amarna legacy, restored the temples, and re-established strong central authority. He left no heir and named his successor a fellow military man, Ramesses I, Seti I, and finally Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great, brought the new kingdom to its zenith. Ramses II ruled for over 60 years. He fought the Hittites at the legendary Battle of Kadesh, built Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum, and filled the land with his colossal image. Though the battle ended in a draw, it led to the world's first known peace treaty. Egypt stood tall, proud and powerful. But behind the grandeur, internal strains, economic, political, and spiritual, began to accumulate. Egypt's golden age would end not with a fall, but with a slow fading. Still, the new kingdom remains the crown jewel of Egyptian history. Even the brightest sun must set. After centuries of power, expansion, and grandeur, Egypt began to wane. The new kingdom, once a titan of the ancient world, gave way to division, corruption, and a new enemy from within: time. Egypt's decline was not sudden, but slow, drawn out, and deeply spiritual. A kingdom built on divine order now faced religious turmoil, regional rivalry, and the unraveling of royal authority. This is the story of how the empire began to slip away. Ramses II's death marked the end of Egypt's last truly mighty reign. His successors, from Ramses III to Ramses XI, struggled to maintain order. Ramses III fended off invasions by the Sea Peoples and Libyans, but Egypt's treasury bled dry in the process. His reign ended in betrayal, the infamous harem conspiracy, a palace plot involving his own wives and court officials. Corruption and intrigue now rotted the royal house from within. The 20th dynasty faltered under weak rulers. By the time of Ramses XI, the government in Thebes and the Delta functioned almost independently. Egypt, once again, fractured into separate spheres of power. As royal power declined, the priests of Amun in Thebes grew stronger. These high priests controlled vast temple estates, labor forces, and regional armies. They were the spiritual stewards of Egypt, and increasingly, its political masters. During the 21st dynasty, these priests did not just advise the pharaoh, they ruled Thebes in all but name. In the north, a new dynasty arose at Tanis, claiming the throne but struggling to project power across the land. Egypt had entered a new phase, not foreign invasion, but internal division. Two Egypts once again, upper and lower, with spiritual kings in the south and political kings in the north. By the 22nd dynasty, Egypt was no longer ruled by native families alone. Libyan military chiefs, descendants of earlier settlers, began seizing the throne. Shoshenq I, the most notable among them, reunited Egypt briefly and even appears in the Bible as Shishak, who attacked Jerusalem. These Libyan kings retained Egyptian traditions but ruled as outsiders. Their control was constantly challenged by rival dynasties and city-states. Egypt now resembled a mosaic of power centers, rather than a unified kingdom. Kings came and went quickly. Some ruled simultaneously. Civil war, religious conflict, and local uprisings plagued the land. The glory of empire gave way to the reality of survival. Egypt's monuments, once pristine, began to crumble. Pyramids were no longer built. Temples were reused or abandoned. The Valley of the Kings, once sacred, became a target for grave robbers. The economic collapse meant that royal tombs were plundered, sometimes even by officials entrusted to protect them. Many New Kingdom pharaohs had their bodies moved secretly to hidden caches to preserve them. The tomb of Ramesses II, looted and vandalized, was eventually reburied with others at Deir el-Bahari, discovered only in the 19th century. Even the dead were not safe from Egypt's decline. As Egypt fractured, a new power rose in the south. The kingdom of Kush, centered in Nubia, had long been influenced by Egyptian culture. Now, they returned the favor by conquering their former masters. Pianki, a Kushite king, led an army northward around 750 BCE. He took Thebes, defeated rival rulers, and established the 25th dynasty. His successors, including Shabaka and Taharka, ruled as true pharaohs. The Kushite pharaohs revered Egyptian religion and revived temple building. They presented themselves as restorers of Maat. Under Taharka, Egypt briefly regained unity and strength. But to the east, a new threat loomed, one that would change the fate of Egypt forever: Assyria. The Assyrians, the great warlords of Mesopotamia, clashed with the Kushite rulers in a brutal series of invasions. By 664 BCE, they had sacked Thebes. Egypt's sacred city was plundered, a shocking symbol of the empire's vulnerability. The last Kushite pharaohs retreated to Napata in Nubia. In their place, the Assyrians installed client kings, particularly Psemtik I, a Scythe ruler from the Delta, who would found the 26th dynasty. Thus ended the third intermediate period. Egypt had survived occupation, fragmentation, and internal collapse. But it was no longer the dominant power it once was. It had become a relic of greatness, respected, but no longer feared. The age of empires had passed, and Egypt stood on the edge of a new age, one of foreign overlords, brief revivals, and final decline. The empire had fractured, its gods challenged, its rulers toppled, but Egypt was not yet finished. Out of the ruins rose a final era of ambition, a last breath of independence and identity. The late period was Egypt's swan song, brief, bold, and haunted by the footsteps of conquering armies. For 2 more centuries, the Nile would whisper of ancient glory before falling silent under foreign rule. Following the Assyrian sack of Thebes in 664 BCE, Psemtik I of Sais emerged as a powerful ruler in the Delta. With Assyrian backing and later independence, he unified Egypt under native rule once again. The 26th dynasty, often called the Saiete dynasty, marked a cultural revival. Psemtik restored temples, re-established order, and promoted ancient traditions. He invited Greek mercenaries and traders to settle in Naucratis, marking the beginning of deep Greek influence. His successor, Necho II, ambitiously sought to expand Egypt's navy and influence. He attempted to build a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea and launched military campaigns into the Near East, even clashing with Babylon at Carchemish. The Side rulers saw themselves as heirs to the great pharaohs of the past. Art and sculpture mimicked Old Kingdom styles. Temples were rebuilt or restored in Memphis, Sais, and Abydos. Hieroglyphic inscriptions became more elaborate. Priestly education flourished. The cult of Osiris gained new prominence, while Amun and Ra were fully restored as state deities. Despite foreign threats, the Nile Valley buzzed with economic growth, architectural activity, and intellectual revival. It was a cultural echo of Egypt's golden ages, a brief glimpse of what might have been. But the world beyond Egypt was changing. In Mesopotamia, the Assyrians collapsed, only to be replaced by the Babylonians, and soon after, the rising power of Persia. Egypt's attempts to resist these new empires failed. Necho II's defeat at Carchemish in 605 BCE by Babylon marked the end of Egyptian expansion. Internal divisions and over-reliance on Greek mercenaries weakened the native army. Though Psemtik II and Apries tried to keep Egypt strong, the looming storm could not be avoided. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II marched into Egypt and defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. Egypt had fallen, not to drought nor civil war, but to a foreign empire whose ambition rivaled its own. Under Persian control, Egypt became a satrapy, a province of the Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses crowned himself pharaoh, but ruled through local administrators. Persian kings respected Egyptian religion, but taxed the people heavily and sometimes desecrated temples. Rebellions followed. Native uprisings were frequent, but none successful until nearly a century later. Even so, Egyptian culture persisted. Temples remained active. Priests still carried on rituals. The divine order, though shaken, endured. Persian rule brought both hardship and modernization. Infrastructure improvements, a powerful bureaucracy, and contact with other parts of the vast Persian world. In 404 BCE, amid Persian instability, Egypt seized a final chance at independence. A series of native rulers established the 28th through 30th dynasties. Kings like Emerteus, Nectanebo I, and Nectanebo II revived Egyptian pride. Nectanebo I and II led a cultural resurgence. Massive temple complexes were constructed, including additions to Philae and Karnak. Nectanebo II was a prolific builder, and under him, the priesthoods flourished one last time. But Egypt's resources were limited. Persian ambitions returned. In 343 BCE, Artaxerxes III reconquered the Nile Valley. Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh of Egypt, fled south, into obscurity. The long arc of native Egyptian rule had ended after 3,000 years. Persia ruled Egypt for a final 2 decades, harshly, at times brutally. But in 332 BCE, a new conqueror appeared, Alexander the Great. To many Egyptians, Alexander was a liberator from Persian oppression. He visited the oracle of Amun at Siwa and was declared a son of the god, a pharaoh in his own right. He founded a new capital, Alexandria, which would soon eclipse all others. But with Alexander's arrival, a new era began, one of Greek rule under the Ptolemies, and later Roman control. Though Egyptian culture would persist, its independence was lost forever. The late period was Egypt's final stand, a time of resilience, reform, and remarkable endurance. It fought to remain itself in a world that no longer made room for ancient empires. Civilizations rise, and they fall. Kingdoms are born, and they perish. But some never truly disappear. Ancient Egypt, though conquered, colonized, and forgotten for millennia, still whispers through the ages. In her temples, her scrolls, her pyramids, and the echoing silence of the Nile. This is not just the end of a history, but the beginning of a legacy. With Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE, Egypt entered a new era, ruled by Greeks, beginning with the Ptolemaic dynasty. Though foreign, the Ptolemies embraced Egyptian customs, called themselves pharaohs, and built temples in traditional style. Alexandria became a beacon of learning, home to the Great Library, the Pharos Lighthouse, and scholars from across the known world. Greek and Egyptian worlds merged, producing new art, theology, and scientific discovery. Still, this was not the Egypt of old. Native rule was gone. Priests bowed to foreign kings, and over time, the Egyptian language gave way to Greek in politics, and later, to Latin. The most famous Ptolemaic ruler was Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh of Egypt. Fluent in Egyptian, Greek, and several other languages, she represented a rare fusion of cultures and ambition. Her alliances with Julius Caesar, and later Mark Antony, placed Egypt at the heart of Roman political drama. But after the defeat at Actium in 31 BCE and her subsequent suicide, Egypt fell to Octavian, later Augustus. In 30 BCE, Egypt became a Roman province. The age of the pharaohs, of temples, of divine kingship had come to an end. Under Roman rule, Egypt remained vital, a breadbasket for the empire. But culturally, it declined. Native religion persisted in rural temples, but Greek and Roman gods now shared space with the old pantheon. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had taken hold. The ancient gods were declared false. Temples were closed. The priesthood dissolved. Hieroglyphs, once a sacred language, fell silent. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Arabic became dominant. The last vestiges of ancient Egyptian religion and writing disappeared. The long silence had begun. For over 1,000 years, the ruins of Egypt lay buried in sand and mystery. Travelers wrote of colossal statues and strange symbols. Myths and legends obscured reality. Then, in 1799, the Rosetta Stone was discovered. And in 1822, Jean-François Champollion cracked the code of hieroglyphs, breathing life back into a forgotten language. Archaeologists soon followed. Flinders Petrie, Howard Carter, Zahi Hawass. From the tomb of Tutankhamun to the golden mummies, the world was captivated. Ancient Egypt became a symbol of eternity, mystery, and human ingenuity. No ancient civilization has gripped the imagination quite like Egypt. Its pyramids became icons. Its gods, memes of eternity. Its stories, retold in novels, films, and museums around the world. The Eye of Horus, the Book of the Dead, the Curse of the Pharaohs, all entered popular culture. Egypt became more than a place. It became a myth, a metaphor for mystery and power. Even modern architecture and design borrow its motifs. Fashion, jewelry, and tattoos revive ancient symbols. Egypt is no longer just history. It's art, inspiration, identity. Egypt gave us more than monuments. It gave us the calendar, early mathematics, medicine, and state administration. It taught humanity how to preserve memory in stone, word, and soul. It showed that civilization requires balance between power and belief, science and spirit, man and nature. From the first pharaoh to Cleopatra, from the Old Kingdom to the shadow of Rome, Egypt endured, and though its political power faded, its cultural power became immortal. To study Egypt is not just to look into the past, but to peer into the heart of civilization itself. And in doing so, we find that Egypt never truly fell. It simply transformed into legend.